in the context of a congested timetable for teaching, as well as the numerous challenges facing students at university today, including students increasingly removing themselves from the active practice of learning unto letting artificial intelligence do the work for them, which seems to be one of the challenges we have. There are, of course, many, many other issues that one gets to mind and discuss when it comes to problems of learning and teaching in the university space. Colleagues, these issues seem to us in discussion to be only mirroring the front end of what are in fact deeper issues at the back end that requires further exploration and further debate. It is in fact in the context of that the faculty proposed that there be a series of seminars that happens once in a term or whenever practicable, to try to in fact deal with a number of questions inherited, relating to inherited assumptions about the education system in South Africa, particularly higher education. So the goal thereof was in fact to reimagine ways in which we can speak to our local context, our histories, as well as the future of education in the country. So the questions that we sought then to try to address in this new series, this is the inaugural series, include this, and this is not exhaustive. What is a university at a basic level? And why should universities exist? Secondly, what functions, social and otherwise, should universities play in the modern world? Should the university, thirdly, should they continue to operate as they do today? And what would be the implications of universities continuing to operate in the manner they are doing today? Essentially, do we need to see a change in the higher education system to reset and reconfigure once again, or should we continue as normal? And then, fourth, how can we cultivate a love for learning and a trust on campus? Do our students think that we are trustworthy enough to prepare them for life beyond us, beyond our retirement, and for life beyond their experience in the university system? And lastly, what does the widespread academic dishonesty reveal about our work and the students' motivations? So, in this first part of the series, we are very, very privileged to have a very distinguished scholar that I am too lightweight to introduce tonight. And so, for that reason, I would like to ask my senior, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, who is currently acting Vice-Chancellor for this month, Dr. Kwesi Mzilikazi, to introduce our speaker for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good evening, colleagues, our distinguished guest. Thank you, Dean. I recall when the conversation about this series on first principles first came up at the Humanities Faculty Board. It was in the first faculty board of this year. And I recall saying to the Dean, if it should ever be realized, I would very much like to attend. So I'm really, really pleased that the series has come about. Please allow me to introduce our guest speaker for this evening. Professor Jonathan Jansen is a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University and the immediate past president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He completed his BSc at the University of the Western Cape and his teaching credentials at UNISA before doing an MS at Cornell and a PhD at Stanford. In 2023, Professor Jansen was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and was the Shin Yiden Global Fellow at Harvard University during 2024. He is a luminary in the field of education with over 30 books to his name, including the acclaimed Leading for Change, As by Fire, The End of the South African University, Song for Sarah, Lessons from My Mother, and The Decolonization of Knowledge, which was published in 2022. These are just some of his works. He's known for his seminal contributions over 4 decades to the advancement of education scholarship through advanced research and publication, scholarly teaching, university management, science leadership, school improvement, educational innovation, capacity development, public engagement, and science advocacy. Professor Jansen's insights into race, leadership, and personal growth, as well as his tireless advocacy for tolerance and human rights, has earned him accolades, including a Lifetime Achiever Award for Africa at the Education Africa Global Awards in New York, and the University of California's Spend Love Award for his contribution to tolerance, democracy, and human rights. Professor Jansen, we are delighted that you have trekked all the way to Makanda, and we look forward to your lecture this evening. Thank you. Take this mic.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Let me just correct 2 things. Number one, oh, no, you can sit. I'm not kidding. I won't embarrass you. Number one, we must update that CV. The immediate past president is my good friend, Stephanie Burton, and I am not a distinguished professor at Stellenbosch. In fact, my letter of appointment, which was written by an Afrikaans tannie, says that I am an extinguished professor. So I would like us to be accurate this evening. What a wonderful thing. The first time I came to Rose University was to deliver something called the Oosthuizen Lecture. I remember that many years ago, and I pissed off some of the people here that didn't talk to me for a long time. And it is great to be back, obviously. And thank you for this great idea to the faculty. What's it, arts or humanities? What do you call it? Humanities. Thank you. This is a great idea. Thank you, Pedro, for all the arrangements. Thank you to all of you who warned me not to drink the water from the tap. I've never before seen such a beautiful, incredibly valuable university in any country situated inside a dysfunctional municipality. It's really, it's horrible, etc. But thank you for what you do here. Okay, so I lead a double life, ladies and gentlemen. In the mornings, I get up at 4 o'clock and I prepare to work at a high school. I've been there now for 20 months and 2 weeks, 3 days and 4 hours. And it has completely changed my life. And then in the afternoon, so I start there at 6:30. And then at about 1 o'clock, I drive from the Cape Flats to Stellenbosch, about 50, 60 minutes along the coastal road. And I do what professors do, which is to mentor and supervise, occasionally teach. Got 12 research teams around the world. We do a book or 2 or 3 a year. And I enjoy just being a professor and not having to go to a faculty board or to a senate or a council meeting, which of course I did all my life. So I think those of you here who are academics, that must be your end goal in life, just to be a professor, just to profess, and not to have all this other stuff that clogs up your life. And then at about 7 o'clock in the evening, I drive from Stellenbosch to my house in the southern suburbs. So it's another hour's drive. And then the next morning, 4 o'clock, I get up and I go back to the school. Now, why am I at this high school? I'm at this high school because in 2023, they had the worst academic results in the province of the Western Cape. And initially I said to myself, oh, what a pity, but I already have 12 schools that I'm working with. I cannot take on another school. And until I realized that the school is literally next to the family house in Retreat, where I grew up for most of my life. And so I went to bed that night and I tossed and I turned and then I heard my mother's voice, my late mother's voice from the grave. And what did she say, sir? Do something. You don't know my mother. She uses many words. What do you think, sir? It started with the word charity. Come on, man, work with me. Charity begins at home. And so I woke up in a sweat and I called the head of department for education, the superintendent general, or whatever fancy names they give them, and I said, Brent, the University of Stellenbosch pays my salary. I'm prepared to help that school turn around. I've done it in 9 provinces and in 13 countries. I'm offering you, do you want it or not? He said, when can you start? I said, tomorrow morning. So I drove up to the school, and the principal was delighted that I was there. So was the governing body. And there were a whole number of teachers who said, this is good. And there were other teachers who said, in my second language, we just got to sort of first see, you know, whether this chap is real. And so I worked with the school for a while with the principal. Somebody will just have to, sorry. If you could just, I can't see anything on the screen. So if you could just go back to the slides. And so I worked with with the principal and the team and the governing body, and I said, okay, you got the worst results in the province. That takes some doing. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to help you turn around the school. But I can only do it if there's energy from your side. I can't do it if you don't think this is a good idea. And so the first morning I came to the school, I'll never forget this, before anyone was there except the security, and I decided to walk through the school. It was dark. And as I walked through the school, I couldn't believe what I saw. First of all, on every door, classroom door, there was a graffiti. Yo Master, Yo Pastor, that, and so on. And I thought, my God. As I went up the staircase, there was more condoms than in the Department of Health, right? I mean, just condoms everywhere, okay? And I remember saying to myself, oh my God, where did I land this morning? And when the school started, when the kids started to come in, I went into a classroom, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. I went into this classroom, and I couldn't believe the chaos. The teacher was in front of the class thinking that he was teaching. At the back of the class, there were 2 kids exploring each other's tonsils. There were another group of boys just beating each other. That took a while to land, I can see, you know. There's another group of boys just beating the hell out of each other for their sheer existence. There were 2 girls with backpacks. Everybody has a backpack at the school. And they were going home. They just arrived. But now they decided, no, they're going home. And of course, there was a chap with earphones. I couldn't believe what was going on. The teacher's teaching. I went to the principal's office and I said, Miss, you have a dysfunctional school. And she said with the lilt of a Cape Flats accent, she's Afrikaans teacher, very good one. She said, "Nee, meneer, how can you say that?" I said, "Well, come with me. Come with me. Let's walk through the school." And then I showed her everything that I saw. By the way, the condoms is a very interesting story. I don't know what they do here in the Eastern Cape. Did you, because we found the culprit, so we dragged him into the principal's office. Do you know, sir, what they use the condoms for?
Safe intercourse?
For what? You know, I had so much respect for you when you get to this place. Safe intercourse. Where have you been? No, this is used, so the boy convinced us it's used to polish your shoes. I had no idea. I said to him, what a waste of a condom. But anyway, so I'm looking at all of this going on, and the principal is clearly now in shock because she saw the condom, she saw the swearing, the graffiti, she saw and as we're walking, one of the security guys comes to me and he says to me, "Professor, help, kyk daar." And he said, I looked up, and one boy decided it was too far to walk to go to the edge and come down the stairs of the upstairs. He's going to come down the drain pipe. So he's sliding down the drain. Have you ever been in a situation where you smack yourself and you say, am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And I thought, oh my God. And I went home that night, and, you know, I'm a blue bull, we don't cry. You know, Orlando, I'm a Buccaneer, we don't cry. That's Chiefs people. You know, we're strong, we're real men, you know. But that morning at 4 o'clock, I was in tears in my study, and I said to myself, oh my God. Our government has completely neglected the children of the working classes and the poor. I just finished a book about this whole experience, which should come out next year. So I went back to the school. Now I'm on fire. But now I must be careful because I've got two roles. The one role is that of a change agent trying to change the school. The other is the role of a social scientist trying to understand why there's a problem in the first place. And sometimes those two roles, you know, clash. So anyway, I go into a class. Now I'm in teacher mode. It's a different class, a grade 9 class, and again, chaos, different teacher. Halfway through the class, through the chaos, a kid comes in, and she is, she's got her earphones on. The teacher doesn't care. Just between you and me as a former high school teacher, you come into my class 1 minute late, I'll kill you. Not kill, I mean, you know. This kid comes in, and she walks like they walk on the Cape Flats, as if there's something wrong with her vertebral column. And she comes in, and she's got earphones on, and her tracksuit, school tracksuit, is over her head. And I'm sitting in the back, and I lost it. And I said, my girl, come here. So she came. Said, take that bloody thing off your head, man. You know, so she took it off, and then she did something that I never thought would ever happen to me in this life. She did what a good Cape Flats woman does. She put her finger in, yeah. She came up to my face, put her nose against my nose. Then she took her index finger and put it under my chin. And then she said something that had to carry me out. I was laughing so much. She put her index finger under my chin and said, and why are we so unhappy today? We! You know, as they say in that area of the world, she had pluck. I said, my girl, you know, I teach big rugby boys at Stellenbosch University. They wouldn't even dream of coming that close to me. Now I realize we're in deep trouble. So, at least I had data. At least I knew what the score was. At least I knew the relationship between performance and this dysfunction that I saw in the schools. So the principal, I said to her, Miss, this is what I found out for 2 or 3 days. And then she said something that changed that entire school. She said, meneer, wat wil u hê moet ek doen? What do you want me to do? And I said, I'm so glad you asked because we're going to do it. And then we started a whole process, which I'm not going to talk about, except to say that the school's results went from 36% to 66% in 9 months in grade 12. This year it will be 100%. Not because we're smart, just because we did a few things to change 2 things in a school. And by the way, this applies to any organization, whether it's a private company or a school. One is you've got to change the performance, in this case, academics. The other is you've got to change the culture of the school. This is not sustainable unless the underlying culture of the school changes as well. And so I put out a call, as some of you might know, to professors around the country, and I said, guys, whatever you think you're doing, you're screwing up the preparation of teachers. So I'm looking for people who are professors who are prepared to go back to teach their subject that they did. Mine was the life sciences, or biology as we used to call it. I want to see you go back. I'll give you 100,000 rand, and all you need to do is to go and teach your subject, but it must be in a dysfunctional school. So we actually have a school in Grahamstown, in Makanda. I'm not going to name the school, but I hope that professor is here. I haven't seen her yet. And so we've got 2 people at WITS, 1 here, 1 at UniZulu, 2 at UCT, and we're going to pool the data in November, and then again in January, and then put together an account of what I'm about to share with you. In any event, I just want to say one more thing before I go to universities. So I said to the principal, okay, we're making progress here in trying to change the school from the top down. We also need to figure out how to change the school from the bottom up. Give me a class to teach. It was the biggest mistake of my life. She immediately said, 9A2. Now, even I had heard that that's where you go when you want to end your career. 9A2. And I had to teach in Afrikaans, which is difficult for me because it's not my first language. And especially when you're teaching science, you must now, it's difficult. I don't know. That's why I failed first year at university, at UWC. Those days, everybody spoke Afrikaans. And I could figure out that carbohydrates and koolhydrate are the same thing. But stikstof and nitrogen, they don't even sound the same. But I had to prepare. So I went into 9A2, and there was a huge fight. And the kids were creating a noise. And I stood in front there. No, it's hard to miss me. A big, black, overweight male, it's hard to miss me. But there was chaos. And then I realized I cannot approach the school, the class, the way I would if I was at Westerwood or St. Cyprian's, which is, excuse me, boys and girls, would you kindly take your seats so that the class would begin? What would happen to me, ma'am? They would have me for lunch, dinner, breakfast. And so I said, so I apologize to you, but this is what I did. I can't be dishonest. I said to them, would you motherfuckers take your seat right now? And you, sir, if you breathe too loud, you're dead. They got such a shock. They settled down. They looked at me in fear. And then I taught them as if their lives depended on it. And I taught them, you'd be proud of me as professor of engineering and chemistry. I taught them the periodic table. Can you think of something more soul deadening than teaching the periodic table of elements? But you see, I had spent 7 hours preparing a 50-minute lesson. Now, in my day, you get 3 science or biology textbooks, you lay it out, you get one from the nuns in Ikopo, and you lay it out, and then you put your own ideas. No, there's hundreds of videos on everything. Most of it is crap, by the way. But you choose the best among them. By the way, the University of Pretoria's science things on there is really excellent, I have to say. And I put my own ideas in, but I prepared, because you see, I know the periodic table, but now I got to know it from the perspective of a child, okay? Of a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old. And so I taught them. And something happened that I didn't expect so quickly. They were into this and the bell rang. And a boy got up. He said, "Meneer," said in Afrikaans, "I beg you, don't send us back to our regular classes." The periodic table, for God's sake. So what happened there is the question. So every time they needed somebody to teach what the CAPS curriculum calls ATPs, annual teaching plans, I taught, I'm very nervous about some of the things I taught because sitting with an expert here in chemistry, I'm embarrassed. But I taught life sciences, which was easy because I know this stuff back to front, microorganisms, evolution, brought in microscopes from microbiology department so they could see both bacterial and fungal cells under 40 magnification. This week they are going to, next week, sorry, they're going to Stellenbosch University to see a humanoid robot that will teach them Newton's 3 laws. And then they're going to also look at atoms under an electron microscope, which doesn't happen to most people, let alone grade 10 kids. And I taught quantitative chemistry, which I'm doing right now, by the way, with this physics class. Here's something very important. I discovered that B.F. Skinner might have been right. Now, I was taught by constructivists at Cornell University. They regarded behaviorists as the Taliban. You couldn't even mention behavior. And so when I did this teaching fellowship at Harvard last year, one of the conditions was you must have a seminar for the professors. So I put out the title, Why B.F. Skinner Might Have Been Correct. There was standing room only. People showed up because, he's a god there, but he's also, heavily criticized by the constructivists. So people showed up and I said, listen here, if you're teaching, as I discovered, kids, where you assume in grade 9 and 10 they would have heard of the atom, molecules, bonding, you can continue. But what if there is no prior knowledge, as constructivism assumes? And I mean formal prior knowledge. You can't simply take off in grade 9, basic grade 8. You have to keep going back. Here's the problem. The CAPS curriculum is so loaded with content that you can't get through any of that stuff, and so you've got to make a decision. Do you want the kids to learn, or do you want to comply? Okay, that's what many teachers have to struggle with in all 9 provinces. And so, of course, I just said this to the department. What we're going to do is make sure the kids learn, okay? And behavior and memory plays a big part in the first 2 weeks of teaching any topic as a platform for doing more constructivist teaching. It's not the end of the teaching, it's a platform for the teaching, because I also have to keep your attention when half of the kids are already chemically compromised by the time they get through the gate at 8 o'clock, okay? The problem with our policies is they are normed after middle class schools. These kids worked on a physics problem throughout the night. This week, this happened this week. Have you ever seen a class like this? They solve a physics problem and they behave like this? And so what happens is, I gave them a really difficult problem, because the previous day they said to me, sir, you gave us a problem on the WhatsApp group. You are driving us to depression. It's too easy. Give us something really tough, so they had to work out equations of motion from a first-year physics class at university. And when they got it right, they went completely crazy. There were high fives going around, and then they all sang. They said, sir, can we sing? I said, what do you want to sing? And then they broke out into Oh Happy Day, and I watched the 2 Muslim students in front, and Rabia and Nuran also singing, Oh Happy Day, when Jesus washed my sins away. I don't know, crap, I'm going to get in trouble with the mullahs. But what a joy to teach these children. So I learned a few things here before I shift to higher education. I learned, first of all, something that is so important, that coverage is not a priority. What is a priority is connection. If you can't connect with the people that you teach, you've lost them, okay? I also learned, I talked about Skinner, I talked about what? I also learned that you cannot separate learning and living. Let me give you a very practical example of this. Most of my kids, not all of them, live in Lavendale, Capricorn, the old Vrygrond, and so on and so forth. They dodge bullets every single day. When we have school governing parent meetings, all the grandmothers show up. There are no parents. Every time a kid is in trouble, I interview them for 5 minutes. I say, where's your mother? My ma se tik op, meneer. Okay? Waar's jou pa? My pa is a gangster, or my pa is in Paulsville. Okay? So this kid is traumatized over and over and over again before they come to school, and we expect them to be normal. We say to them, go and do homework. It's the most ridiculous idea to tell these kids to do homework in a house where one of my matriculants say there are 25 people in a council house. What homework? So I do homework at school. Because you see, the policy assumes a dog, a cat, a mom, a dad, and a car. There's nothing in the policy world that addresses the context within which these children live, right? So because we've brought back difficult subjects, like physical science, pure math, and accounting, I can only do that after school for a year or two as a 7th subject or 8th subject, while we get the department to reinstate it on the grid. These kids sit there from 2 to 5 every single day. Last week, the parents came to the school at 5 o'clock. The principal waits for me to finish, and the principal says, meneer, ons het 'n probleem, we've got a problem. The parents want their children. So I went to the kids, I said, listen, your parents are here, go home. No, sir, give us another problem. But you see what happened. You don't have to believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You don't have to believe in his very basic level of the physiological needs of a kid to understand that you've got to feed them. So I feed them. And every lesson starts with a moral lesson, which I hate, because I hate telling kids what's right and wrong. So the other day, the first time I put out the food, they all rushed the food, and I said to them, no, can we talk? What is the purpose of education? So we have 5 minutes. And they said the stuff you would say. So I said, you know, one of the purposes of education is to tame your passions. So I'm going to put out that food again. And if you rush towards that food, I have failed you. Okay, I'm hungry. Yeah. So some of the kids got up and gave the food to all the other students, and then we sat. And so you can't separate living and learning, okay? You can't get on with the periodic table when you haven't talked about the periods of the goal that I just took home, and I said, you're going to clean up, then we're taking you to go and buy sanitary pads, and then I'm taking you back to school, and then you decide if you want to stay. And then the kid jumps out. She's happy, but she jumps out of the car. I said, jump back in at the school. I said, didn't anybody teach you to say thank you? I'm so sorry, sir, thank you. No, I don't need the thank you. I need you to know the thank you, because you won't get a job if you don't know these basic habits of what it means to. So this new theory of working class education, any of you interested, I'll send you a draft of the final chapter 8, is about the inseparability of living and learning. We get that right? You get that. The reason these kids come to school on a Saturday, stay to 2 to 5, get excited about solving an equation of motion, is because there was a connection with them that changed everything. By the way, for those of you who are teachers or planning to become teachers, I can tell you this with some confidence. Half your disciplinary problems go away if you are thoroughly prepared as a teacher. They will know you respect them when you are prepared. If you show up, the kids will show up. Teachers don't believe that. And by the way, let me just tell you this. It is infinitely easier to change a kid than to change a teacher. Woo! Oh my God, it's tough. They have their own problems. I don't want to undermine especially stress, or allopathic load, as the psychotherapists call it. They stress inside out. But if you show up and your face looks as if you lost a relative, get out of teaching and sell insurance. Because the kids will pick up that you don't love your discipline. You're not passionate about what you do. Okay, let's shift gears from school to... So last year I taught the PGCs, 280 students, every Friday morning at 8 o'clock. I'd leave home at 6 so that, just in case people are throwing stones near the airport on the N2, which happens regularly, as you know. And then I get there at about 7, and I prepare for my class. And so I asked Johannes Cronje, a really great professor of computer science and engineering and education. I hired him years ago at Tikkies when I was the dean. And he says, this must be the only class in South Africa where at 8 o'clock, 280 students are seated. He says, what did you give them? I said, I gave them the following. Number one, I told them that you will not be able to pass this class unless you are physically present. In other words, you're not here, fine. I'm not your parents. And even if I were, I wouldn't care whether you come or not. But just so you know, if you're not here, you'll miss out on the education that is going to happen in the next hour, hour and a half, and so on. Your notes are completely useless. And I want to say to those of you who give students notes, you are dumbing them down. For those of you who come with hundreds of PowerPoint slides, you are lazy. You are intellectually lazy, okay? Your job is to teach those kids in a way that makes them completely dependent on what happens. The tests. So this is what would happen. I wish I got a recording if any of you are interested. So I would teach you, for example, different ways of understanding education policy, particularly something that I've developed over the years called looking at policy as political symbolism. The questions are asked in the tests and the exam comes out of something that you might have said or you might have said. It's not in, a chat won't help you. No notes will help you because you have to be present in those debates to understand what questions might emerge as interesting, etc., etc. The first test came out, of course, students will test you, and most of them got 0. There was a long line outside my office. Kids who went to Paul Rus, Parel Gymnasium, Bloemhof, all these fancy schools. And the tears were only, Professor, en al my jare in die onderwys, en ek het nooit 'n nou gekry nie. Well, you got a 0 because you can't bloody think. Because what the NSC exam did for you was to teach you how to memorize, was to teach you algorithms, was to teach you heuristics. But if I throw a question outside of the context of original application, you're gone. Now, of course, I didn't tell them those words, but that's essentially right. Tears are running down the face. Well, welcome. But if you're not in my class, you're not going to be able to understand what happened in the intellectual exchange. And so, unfortunately, I can't do it with you, which was my plan, because I must model what I'm teaching. But the tech people told me very clearly, stand in one place, which I can tell you is really difficult. And so I use Socratic questioning, and I would use that to build the lesson, to build the intellectual foundations of the argument, to take you through. And everybody is fair game. I can jump on you, I can come to you, and everybody gets engaged in the lesson, and they're awake, and the moment you nod off, I'm on to you. By the way, that's why I stopped teaching during COVID. I can't teach through a screen. because I realized I'm so dependent on body language. If I see a white student cringe when I'm talking about race and policy, then I know I must just slow down a little bit till she comes on board. If I see a black student getting very angry because he doesn't understand yet that I don't have a point of view in this class, and I give you different scenarios that might make you feel uncomfortable. Talk about being uncomfortable. Did you watch that interview with Anele and Ellen Zeller? Ellen must really get out of this game, anyway. But, you put things. The Charlie Kirk thing. If you're a social scientist and you don't put Charlie Kirk into the discussion, what are you doing? Because South Africans follow this dude, okay, passionately. But in other words, using Socratic questioning. Now, by the way, professors can't teach generally in higher education. If you're an engineer or you're a computer scientist, you weren't taught how to teach. So what do? You teach the way you were taught, and you think that's teaching. Bad idea. Even professors of education don't know how to teach, because they think they know how to teach based on their own experiences of teaching school. But teaching as an intellectual activity, I hope to persuade you, is much more than instruction. It's not didactics. It's not about transferring knowledge from the knower to the student. That's really a bad concept of teaching. By the way, in my class, I welcome AI. Bring your devices. You'll still fail, but bring it. And so the students show up for my class on ChatGPT, and I said to them, with the help of Kronia, I said to them, okay, I taught you a particular model of how to lead in a dysfunctional school. Put that data into that question into chat, find out what models they come up, and then critique those models based on what I just gave you. And they suckle. Right? And I thank God every day for ChatGPT, because it showed up the superficial nature of assessments in South African classrooms. If you ask a kid, name the 4 parts of the leaf, and there might be 5, of course they're going to go to ChatGPT, because your question is ridiculous. But if you bring in nuance, and you bring in complexity, and you bring in context, and all of that, then for the moment, this might change in 20 years or 10 years. For the moment, Chat doesn't know what to do. It's an input-based model. And so I thank God for ChatGPT, because it shows up the laziness, the intellectual laziness that underpins so much of our assessment practices. The problem isn't Chat. The problem is how you assess, etc. So the students that really struggled, and I can give you some of the samples that we used. Now, I would say, I would concede to you natural scientists, that this is perhaps a little easier to do in the social sciences than in physics, for example. We have a limited set of responses to a question, but even then, you can turn around questions, etc., to make it more challenging, and so on. So, I can hear some of you saying, but how does this work in a large classroom, right? I had 280, this guy has got more than that. This is Michael Sandel, who teaches moral philosophy at Harvard. It's one of my favorite clips. I just want you to listen to this for a couple of minutes.
There's one word.
Oh, sorry, I just want to go back to the...
Your steering wheel.
Oh, so press playing it.
This is, of course, about justice, and we begin with a story. Suppose you're the driver of a trolley car, and your trolley car is hurtling down the track at 60 miles an hour. And at the end of the track, you notice 5 workers working on the track. You try to stop, but you can't. Your brakes don't work. You feel desperate because you know that if you crash into these 5 workers, they will all die. Let's assume you know that for sure. And so you feel helpless until you notice that there is, off to the right, a side track. And at the end of that track, there's one worker working on the track. Your steering wheel works, so you can turn the trolley car, if you want to, onto the side track, killing the 1, but sparing the 5. Here's our first question. What's the right thing to do? What would you do? Let's take a poll. How many would turn the trolley car onto the side track? Raise your hands. How many wouldn't? How many would go straight ahead? Keep your hands up, those of you who would go straight ahead. A handful of people would. The vast majority would turn. Let's hear first. Now we need to begin to investigate the reasons why you think it's the right thing to do. Let's begin with those in the majority who would turn to go onto the side track. Why would you do it? What would be your reason? Who's willing to volunteer a reason? Go ahead, stand up.
Because it can't be right to kill 5 people when you can only kill 1 person instead.
It wouldn't be right to kill 5 if you could kill 1 person instead. That's a good reason. That's a good reason. Who else? Does everybody agree with that reason? Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking it was the same reason on 9/11 with regard to people who flew the plane into the Pennsylvania field as heroes because they chose to kill people in the plane and not kill more people in big buildings.
So the principle there was the same on 9/11. It's a tragic circumstance, but better to kill 1 so that 5 can live. Is that the reason most of you have, those of you who would turn? Yes? Let's hear now from those in the minority, those who wouldn't turn. Yes?
Well, I think that's the same type of mentality that justifies genocide and totalitarianism. In order to save one type of race, you wipe out the other.
So what would you do in this case? You would, to avoid the horrors of genocide, you would crash into the 5 and kill them?
Presumably, yes. Yeah.
Okay, who else? That's a brave answer. Thank you. Let's consider another trolley car case and see whether those of you in the majority want to adhere to the principle better that 1 should die so that 5 should live. This time you're not the driver of the trolley car, you're an onlooker. You're standing on a bridge overlooking a trolley car track. And down the track comes a trolley car. At the end of the track are 5 workers. The brakes don't work. The trolley car is about to careen into the 5 and kill them. And now, you're not the driver. You really feel helpless until you notice, standing next to you, leaning over the bridge, is a very fat man. And you could give him a shove. He would fall over the bridge, onto the track, right in the way of the trolley car. He would die, but he would spare the 5. Now, how many would push the fat man over the bridge? Raise your hand. How many wouldn't? Most people wouldn't. here's the obvious question. What became of the principle? Better to save 5 lives even if it means sacrificing one. What became of the principle that almost everyone endorsed in the first case? I need to hear from someone who was in the majority in both cases.
Okay, you get the point. What do you... Sorry. This is not part of the... Teaching in a large classroom, based on what we've discussed, what did you take away from this particular video? So,
A lot of engagement.
a lot of engagement, even though it's a big group, right?
Polls, see show of hands.
Absolutely. What do you take from this?
Posing a problem and sort of see what they come back with.
Right? Yourself?
Diverse responses, probably from their lived experiences.
Right, right. Why am I picking on you? You have that holy look, so I just keep coming to you. What did you...
Engaging with students.
Engagement. Did you notice he never puts down a student, even though some of the answers were ridiculous, right? He's getting them to participate in the class. Would you go to a class like that? I certainly would want to show up there because it's also giving me real quantities. And they could make the connection between this hypothetical case and 9/11 and other kinds of real life situations that we all deal with. So, in case you didn't notice, what I'm really pushing here is for us to think about teaching, not as a set of activities, you know, to promote your CV and make sure that the Dean Innocent promotes you to associate professor. I'm thinking of teaching as an intellectual activity in its own right, with its own logic. And fundamentally, in the high school science class, in the Sandel class, in the PGCE class, it is about establishing a pedagogical relationship with your students. By the way, this applies equally to postgraduate supervision. I am always surprised, we were talking a little bit about postgrad earlier, I'm always surprised at how many supervisors take weeks, months, years, take off before they respond to a draft chapter from a student. That is disrespectful. That is deeply disrespectful. But what it also suggests is you have not established a relationship with those students, etc. It also talks to presence. What does it mean to be present? I have a PhD student who's doing exactly this, looking at principles and the many ways in which they were present during the pandemic. And it's a wonderful, wonderful idea of how to be present physically, but that's the least of your problems, unless you're a SATU teacher. But how to be present emotionally, psychically, spiritually in the classroom, right? And this is a big issue that we don't talk about because we don't like words like spiritual. We don't like, we want to come in, do my job, get my paycheck, and move out. And so being present in those, the real life context comes through. And this is not about playing games. This is not about simply keeping kids occupied in this very thin version of teaching. No. And I'm going to use university teaching here. I bring in, when I teach curriculum theory, when I teach education policy, I bring in the literature. I bring in theory, not to impose it on you, but to get you to engage it and come up with your own ideas. In other words, it is a teaching that is intellectually demanding. You see, the more I got these kids into physics, the more I made the problems more and more difficult, okay? So that they understand. And then you realize all this nonsense in which we think, only people who are middle class or wealthy can do well in these subjects. It's total nonsense. It is about how we teach them and how we induct them. And so when Joe Muller and other colleagues at UCT talk about powerful knowledge, this is what they mean: disciplinary knowledge. It's not just everyday knowledge. It is being able to take students in any discipline, but you start with what is familiar. You start with what is accessible. You start with where they are, and then you build or scaffold up into, into the really difficult problems in that discipline. Intellectually demanding, that models what we talk about, and that confronts controversy. That is two different contexts. One is schools, one is universities, but the same issues as you would see there. Very heavily reliant on the pedagogical relationship. So in high school, I'm just going to start off with a story. When I realized I was not winning over these kids in the first 3 months, I started to visit them in their homes. And one of the things I did at this high school was I said to the principal, I've got to do one thing that makes them understand that we are serious about them as human beings and not just as cognitive beings. I said, every time a kid has a toothache, I'm taking them to the dentist. So I build up a relationship with the dentist. And so when a kid is in the sick bay, Mondays is always a good time for the sick bay, I discovered. Or the face is swollen, I take them to the dentist. And I say to the dentist, after a while, says to me, oh, Professor Johnson, this is the 20th kid you've brought here, man. This is for free. And then I go to the chemist, same thing happens for the antibiotics and the painkillers, and then I take them back to school. And one day, a grandmother showed up, and she was sitting there in the principal's office, and the tears were rolling down her face. How did I know she was from the Cape Flats? Because she wore a gown. What was the color of the gown? It is always pink, you know. What did she have on her head?
Rollers.
No, the rollers is, she had on a shower cap, but the students told me, Professor, it's a bonnet. It's a bonnet. And the tears are right there. And I said to her, ma'am, why are you crying? She said, no, you took my daughter, Yusra, to the dentist. And then you brought her back to school. And she came home and she ran down the street to show all the people, the 3 missing. That itself is a story, but I don't have time for that. So would you come over to our home for dinner? I said, of course I would have come, provided it's roti and curry. So Auntie Khairu made roti and curry. On the day I had to leave, I said to the principal and a deputy, listen, I'm going to Montague Village. Don't worry about the name. There's no village. It's not Montague. Is it safe? Nee, meneer. Daar skiet hulle jou 6 uur. I didn't know there was a specific time in which they shoot you, etc. Now I'm really determined to go, and so I go to this house, and there's Yusra standing in front of the door, it's after school. She's got the school uniform on, her hair is pulled back. I said, Yusra, at ease. It's no longer school, but she knows. She's so proud the professor's coming. And then I went into the house, and there was Putakasim and Auntie Khairu, and I saw nothing in the house. When I say nothing, like nothing. The only thing I saw, curiously, was 3 fish tanks. And I remember saying to myself, you know how your mind plays with you? I said to myself, what are we going to eat tonight? Guppies? Because I didn't see, there was no food. Okay, inside. Anyway, I enjoyed the conversation. They must understand, my parents were fundamentalist evangelical Christians. They would have loved Charlie Kirk, and so everybody was going to hell except us and the brethren. The Muslims were going to hell, the Anglicans were going to hell, everybody was assigned to hell. That's how I grew up. That's what I believed for a while. I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's true. Oh, by the way, they asked me to speak at an Anglican church recently. And I don't understand the Anglican liturgy and all of it. It's very formal, people marching up and down, for an hour. And then they asked me to speak, and I said to them, well, what a joy to be with all you Anglicans today. In fact, my dad was an Anglican before he found Jesus. And that didn't go down. That didn't go down too well, but I just hope people. Anyway, suddenly out of nowhere, I see Ruti, I see curry first, the samosas, and so on. And I have never in my life had such a beautiful experience of. I called my book Breaking Bread because of that experience. Breaking bread with my Muslim brothers and sisters, my students' family. Her father's a gangster, mother's on drugs, but she's with the grandparents, and I am enjoying this food. Suddenly the lights go out because they didn't put enough money on the meter, you know. We thought it's just grams down. No. So, yeah. Makanda. Now I'm trying to get the attention away from the box because I don't want them to think I'm judging anything, you know. Yusra ran out of the house. Who she robbed, I don't know, but the next thing she came back with money and they put the money on and the lights went on. On the dot, 6 o'clock. But Akasim says, Prof, you don't look, you must go. This is when the shooting apparently starts. So I climbed in my car, feeling incredibly blessed. And I'm driving home. When I get back home in a relatively safe part of Cape Town, my phone pings. And it's from this girl, Yusra. And it's got a question in it, in broken English. Did Prof get home safe? And I cried like a baby. Do you know how easy it is to teach young people? When you think of them as your own, not as the children of somebody else. When they understand you would walk through a wall for them. You see, the pedagogical tricks in the classroom is one thing. The connection with your student is everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for food for thought. But maybe one of the points that you made so eloquently that appeared to be a theme of a discussion is the argument that knowledge starts from what is known, and then you build up to higher order knowledge with time, which obviously is a very critical point in constructivist thinking. I know of young people in another place who dropped literature in English because of Shakespeare's novels. They didn't know what a balcony or a patio or some such concepts that appear in Shakespeare's literature, what those meant. And so there is nothing known that they could build up from. How do you work out student learning in such a scenario where there is relatively very little known or close to nothing that people could build from? I just maybe transpose it into the South African education system. The university system is trying to place itself at par, generally, with global knowledge systems across, regardless of wherever you want to go. Go to Oxford, go to Cambridge, whatever. We want to be at that level because of our understanding of what the outcomes are at different levels. Now, the students that join the university system are assumed to have a certain basic knowledge, but the assumption sometimes may actually be misplaced. How do we deal with the fact that we are dealing with misplaced assumption and building up upon such false assumption. How then should we conceptualize education for a first-year student that is coming in the system? Just want to ask you these related questions before I open the floor to the rest of us. John, please, over to you for now.
Yes, thank you very much. Great question. Look, because I've now worked in high schools and in universities, I noticed something very interesting. The high schools blame the primary schools for sending them weak learners, and then the university blames the high school for sending them underprepared learners. Where does this stop? And then the employer says, you are not giving us, what did the one person call it one day? I always had, it was a very British term, you know, oven-ready graduates. What the hell is that? An oven-ready graduate, right? So we all pass the blame, and the obvious thing to do is for, let's talk about our business, and as universities, is to go into those communities and build those bridges, right? Etc. So almost every university I know has some kind of a program that bridges students into university, particularly those who might not have done as well in their grade 12 results. That is a good thing. Unfortunately, a whole lot of that stuff repeats, you know, what they were supposed to do in grade 12 rather than build on it to broaden their education. When I speak to your previous Vice Chancellor, Salim Badat, and I talk to him about the UFS 101 program that we invited, which is an interdisciplinary program for all of our students in the first year, and I taught in that program. I taught the history module. Every one of the 6,500 students had to do that module because you would learn about astronomy, ethics and the law, nanotechnology, history, social history, and so on. In other words, there was an attempt to educate students before you train them. We've got this wrong. From day one, the chemical engineering students learns chemical engineering. He doesn't know anything yet. You can't, he's a danger, he's a menace to society, right? If you start teaching urban planning or sociology in year one, before the students have a broad understanding. And so in addition to being competent in obviously the preliminary knowledges, you also have to be broad in your ability to be able to speak. Otherwise, you're left with anger. When you're confronted with something you don't understand, and South Africans are very good at this, especially men, your default reaction is you want to fight. That's why we're so good in rugby. You just moor each other, you know, and we're also proud of, look at the metaphors used after the wonderful victory against the All Blacks. There's all these metaphors of, you know, who's strong as opposed to who's wiser, you know, etc. So if you have such a plan, Madam Deputy Vice Chancellor, please do this for the students at this great university and make sure they are educated before they train. Make sure they are broadly exposed, not just to tricks like critical thinking and so on, that's obviously important, but to be able to have an intelligent conversation about economics, to be able to have an intelligent conversation about pandemics, okay? In the absence of that, we are all exposed to this world in which science is so incredibly undervalued. I was standing in the chemist the other day, by the way, and you know, my first degree is a science degree, and then I went into education. And I was complaining. I think when you get to my age and you wait too long in a queue, you just complain. So I was complaining at the pharmacy, you know, and there's an old man standing in front of me, and he got irritated with me because I was complaining, you know, and he had to take an earful. And he said to me, "They also serve who only stand and wait." And then he fell on his back. I said, "John Milton on his blinders." He says, "What? Where did you get that?" Because, you know, I had people who taught me broadly rather than narrowly, and so on. So that's how you get at it. But the fundamental principle that I hope came through today is the students are not your problem. If you start off with the notion that the students can't, then of course they can't. But if you start off with the notion that I will find out where you are and take you to where I want you to be, it works, okay? And that's true in schools as it is in universities. But too many of us are arrogant as academics. Oh, but they don't know enough physics. Well, then teach them enough physics, but do it in a way that makes it intellectually exciting on the one hand, but also intellectually demanding on the other hand. This is not a call for lowering standards. This is a call for increasing the standards via a pedagogy that connects.
Indeed, thank you very much. Colleagues, I will take some questions, 3 questions at a time. Anton and my colleague at the back, followed by Pedro. Thank you, in that order.
Can you write down the questions?
Professor Jens, your first point was something about they won't pass if they're not physically present in the classroom. Do you enforce register, or is that
No.
just what you tell them?
No, no. First of all, administratively, that would be a very heavy load if you've got 280 students. So I don't enforce it. You will feel it if you're not there. And so, because I also don't believe that our role is to tell students, come to class. That's what schools do, right? Our role is to teach in a way that they will sense, if I'm not there, I won't be able to catch up. Did you know, is this true at Rhodes University? I have a number of teaching assistants because the class was large. Did you know they said, can you see that person there? I said, yeah, that's not a student. No, he's an official note taker. Do you have note takers in your classes? Somebody whom the students pay? No. Did you have this at Turkey's? I know Turkey's is... You must have it. Come on, guys. Don't be dishonest with me, man. Please, you all look like good Christians. That note taker was taking beautiful notes. They fired him after 2 lectures because he couldn't capture what I was doing because he has no context for the intellectual conversation. So they fired him. So it's a good question, sir, but no, I'm not going to tell you to come to class and waste my time taking records. You will feel it on your assessment if you're not present. Sir, can I do this one at a time? I'm too old to remember 3 questions.
You mentioned constructivism and Skinner. That doesn't mean gossip, I mean the audience in social sciences. So I don't know if you've ever looked at the social construction model in education, because it strikes me as a lot closer to what you do, that you are trying to get the class to put themselves in your mindset and to understand where they're coming from. And particularly when you're looking at these very different class barriers and language barriers and so on, bridging those social divides strikes me as really important rather than just purely seeing it as a knowledge transfer problem.
I think that's correct. And I would teach, by the way, very differently if you put me in Westerford the next morning, right? Because the class context is different, the social context is different, they all have had a good meal, their parents probably shoved them off to bed. You know what I discovered at the school? Every kid has a cell phone, and when they come to school looking tired and sleeping 1 hour into a 3-hour exam, I'm curious, right? So I said to them, why? No, sir, I was watching my series. And so there isn't a regulation, right, in middle-class homes. Okay, put off your phone, did you do your homework, go brush your teeth, those basic sort of things. I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying when those regulatory kinds of things aren't in place because of broken homes, then you're going to see behaviors that, of course, are of that kind. So you're quite right. In a social constructionist sense, you really build the model around what is in front of you without judging anybody and start with where they are. I agree with that completely.
I agree that we have to start with who things are. That's absolutely important. And to do that, we need to know who our things are, which is not easy. But the other thing that I find that I have discovered is, well, there was this research done in the United States, in colleges in the United States, and I see that it mirrors a lot of what happens here. And most of the students in these 10 colleges that were studied by Harvard psychologists, most of the students have what they call a transactional mindset to knowledge. So they have a particular sort of attitude towards the knowledge project. And my sense is that if we have an onboarding course or a common course, which we should have, and Rhodes has been fighting against it for a long time, unfortunately, that's the sort of thing that we would have to, not so much, in my view, give them stuff to know about astronomy or whatever it is, but to actually get them into the right mindset for learning. And I think that's a difficult one. That's one that I've been puzzled in trying to think of how to do that for a good part of a decade.
This is a very, very crucial point. So let me just mention something which I didn't mention here. So I give the students homework that I know they're going to do because I put an incentive, a la Skinner, to the task. So I gave them 10 physics problems. And I deliberately, this was last week, I deliberately put in a problem in which you needed 3 variables to solve it, and I only put in 2. At 3 a.m. the morning, I lie you not, on our WhatsApp group, the student says to me, "Professor, this problem cannot be solved. There is a variable missing." I said to him, "My boy, well done. Now go to bed." The next morning, I did my 5-minute moral lesson on science isn't just about the right answers. Science is about uncertainty. Science is about messing around. In other words, I'm trying to teach a value here that where the transaction is, give me the scope of the exam and I will write it and we're all happy. No. So that was done quite explicitly, you know, to be able to teach students what the nature of knowledge, and then to talk about, you all talk about Elon Musk, you know, sending up, it's the last time I'll mention the name of that dude, into space, but nobody talks about the number of times it failed. The rocket came down again. And so the nature of science, in the very nature of science, Stephanie and I just did a book with some colleagues. It's called On Discovery. Please buy the book. It was the most challenging book we've ever written, I've ever put together. And it's about how discovery happens across 20, 21 different fields, okay, from astronomy to engineering to philosophy. It's a beautiful philosophy chapter in there by, who's that guy, Pretoria? Thad Metz, I'm sure you know him. And an excellent chapter 2 on surgery, how the hands know from a kidney surgeon. Those underlying values about science and discovery and so on, we don't teach that because the transactional thing is, I mean, when we started off this Common Core, UFS 101, the most common complaint from students is, I came here to study architecture. Why must I learn this? Well, I'm sorry, you came here to be educated. So you're going to do that or you don't get your degree. Now, at some point, you know. The biggest, I hope Rhodes does this, right? Because in the absence of that, we replicate the model of schooling, which is I must prepare you for the exams. And it's the worst kind of education you can give our children. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Thank you.
There's somebody at the back.
I think that's Lalu and colleague at the back. Is there anyone else?
2 colleagues there.
Okay, the 2 of you.
This is the nice thing about being at Rhodes. You all know each other.
I know.
Do you guys still go home for lunch?
I know.
In the middle of the
a lot of our colleagues.
It's amazing. I love this place.
Okay, that's fine. You go.
Lalu.
You go.
Hi, sir. This kind of, not from an educator's perspective, but I wanted to know, it's not necessarily the course that we don't understand, but how do we as the students tell our lecturers the tone in which you speak to us can be very encouraging and we don't want to show up if you speak to us in a certain tone? Because I can meet you halfway and be like, I understand what you're saying and I like this course, but if you speak to me in a certain way as condescending and you put me down, I'm not going to want to show up. So how do I say, hey, respectfully, sir, or ma'am, or whoever, I like your course, but don't speak to me in a kind of way that's not going to make me want to attend. I don't know if I made sense.
You make more sense than any of the other questions. So here's the thing, and thank you for your courage in raising that. Here's the thing. The South African education system, like so much of our society, is based on punishment. It's based on a punitive model of human relations, right? If you left it to South African citizens, we would execute people who commit capital crimes. We've got a nastiness about us, you know, that is true. Can I prove this to you quickly? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you read my column today in the Times, you know what I'm about to do. How many of you, when you were at university, had at least one professor who said something like this? Welcome to Biochemistry 321. By the end of the first semester, half of you will be gone. Hands up if something like that happened to you.
Wow.
Yep. Do you know what? In any of the 9 provinces, I go and I ask that question and the hands go up. How can you tell people they're gone before they came? And so that understanding of I'm teaching down to you, you the problem, okay, I'm just here to get something into your thick skull and then I'm gone, is deeply disrespectful. And the entire point of what I was making is unless there is a relationship that you build. I'm not saying you must be friends with everybody. I'm just saying show that person kindness, respect, engagement. Tell them. Do you know why I'm here with you today? I'm here with you today because in what was the old standard 8, grade 10 today, I had a Latin teacher of all subjects who took me aside and said, you pretend you're dumb, but you have potential. This is before Google. So when my mother came home, I said, Mommy, that Latin teacher, he says, I've got potential. What does it mean? And she says, it means you don't have to play soccer day in and day out. This is why I went to school. You need at least one person. And by the way, whether it's primary school or high school or university, I also have to be honest with you, ma'am. You're going to get professors who really are assholes, right? Look for the ones who are also mentors. Look for the ones. This is also going to be true when you're employed one day. There'll be good employers and there'll be bad employers. So we can't run away from that fact, unfortunately. Hang out with people who give you a sense of worthiness, a sense that you're being heard, and just develop a thick skin with all these creeps. But thank you for asking.
Thank you. So I actually was educated in Ireland and I became a primary teacher. And I just want to share that the president of our college, when we all went in, she said, if you're good enough to get in here, you're good enough to get out of here and do more. So I think that was I mean, there's obviously very different philosophies. But what I wanted to ask you is, you know, you are now of a certain age with all your wisdom and experience, and you're in the classroom bringing to bear this pedagogy of love. You didn't use this word, but you talked about connection. But you really are talking about care and actually a commitment and love, you know? And we were taught when we did our teacher training that it is a commitment of love. It is more than a job. And I just wonder, can you envisage where in South Africa we get to a point where we are actually telling educators that you have the future of the nation in your hands in many ways, and that you are actually doing something that is more than just a job? Because a lot of the time you see people are quite disaffected. I mean, you talked about the blame culture, but I'm just wondering, can you envisage where teachers and the students are not doing education because they couldn't get into science or they couldn't get into something else and they're doing it as their third or first choice? How do we go back to where people are saying teachers are incredibly valuable? You basically shape the future of the nation and you shape the future of these students that are going to go out in the world. I mean, in Finland, in Sweden, in Ireland, the teachers are valued the same as doctors and lawyers. They get paid in the same way. To become a teacher in Ireland, you had to do 3 days of interviews because you had to have more than just your academic qualification. You had to be a certain type of person. You had to show your commitment. You had to show your community engagement. So I'm just wondering, is there a systemic way to start almost valuing teachers so as they understand the significance and importance of that role again?
Yeah, so the short answer is to get there, and you and I are on the same page. By the way, chapter 7 in this book is actually called The Pedagogy of Love.
Okay.
And I spell out what that might mean.
Yeah.
But the short answer is you get there with great difficulty in a country like this where teaching is so debased and looked down on. And I used to do a survey at the University of Pretoria when I was a dean there, and then at the University of the Free State when I was vice chancellor. I would go to the education students and I would say to them, And at that point, it was mainly white, Afrikaans-speaking female students at those two universities, at that point. It's different now. And I would ask them the same question 5 years in a row. Waarom het jy besluit om onderwyseres te word? Why did you decide to become a teacher? And the answer was remarkably the same. What do you think, sir, the answer was? Across all of these young girls. Assist for the future. No, they want to get married. And, you know, what do you think, sir? No, not these girls. No! And I hate money. I mean, give the whole thing, you know. No, all of them said, my graad 6 Engels onderwyser, my grade 8 science teacher. They pointed to a teacher. In fact, one of them said, you know, for a long time, I didn't think teachers went to the toilet. I didn't think they had waste matter in there, you know. I mean, she meant it off as a joke. But when you have a system, there's schools here that I happen to know because of our project. You go in there, you're lucky if you come out alive. Right here. Okay? Now, when the kids see that, they don't have an elevated sense of the profession. In fact, at Mamelodi High School, when I asked the kids who wants to become a teacher, no hands went up. One kid said, the teachers told us, don't become like us. So, in the long term, this requires a culture change. In other words, it requires a valuing of education, okay, that puts teachers front and center. But let me be honest with you. It is extremely difficult to be a teacher when, at the school I'm working at now, you don't have a free period. Remember how we used to have a 1 or 2 periods a day where you can just gather your thoughts and mark a sign? There's nothing like that. Because the middle class schools have what they call governing body posts. In other words, the parents pay for extra teachers so that the rest, you know, have a relatively easy ride. When you don't have that, and you don't have a library, and you don't have a lab, and you don't have any of the basic textbooks in the subject, what you do have are kids who are completely out of control. Then you are not going to inspire anybody. And to make matters worse, you have a country that celebrates the matric results with did you know there are now only did you know this? There's now only 140 schools doing mathematics in South Africa. Everybody shifted to Math Lit. And did you see in the Western Cape? Oh my God, I will show you this picture. The last Math Lit control test. You won't believe this. It had an invoice. And it had 7 questions. Question number 1. Where did this person buy the computer? Right in the corner it says macro. Right there. How was VAT calculated? Right there. VAT. No, man. So we are making choices in real life that makes it very difficult for people to appreciate, to understand, to value teaching as a profession, but it's not the teachers, it's just the conditions under which. You know, if I was teaching in a school where you pay my kids' fees because I teach there, and I have a day off, St. Cyprian's, which is a fascinating school, has the largest aquatic center in the world. And I've taught as a visitor in very fancy schools in the world, high schools, right? And within a few kilometers, you have a kid who drowns in a pit littering toilet. How do we live with ourselves? I don't know how you sleep at night, but for me it's very difficult. So there's a lot there that we must address, but simply telling teachers to get off their behinds, which I do, is not enough.
Yes, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. This afternoon, I just had a wonderful experience of witnessing a student teaching the grade 6 learners mathematics using something that she called forum theater. And I had never experienced such joy. But one of the things that came out for me, and I was asking her, was the language. Because this theater form allowed her to create the conversation in isiXhosa. So I've been wondering at the background of this new policy of the mother tongue based bilingual language. In what ways could maybe you see language as a medium of instruction or engagement in classrooms, even at institutions of higher learning, perhaps playing a role to create disengaged students, even if anyone could try to really try to be with those that are you're learning with. But because of the language itself, creating that dichotomy.
Yeah. Did you say grade 6?
For what? For my experience?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Look, my own view is if we could do that, because it's not just the grammar, it's the culture that comes with the language. It's the expressions that you can use that the students would understand that somebody else wouldn't. So simply getting a white person in, for example, to teach a course in Cape Town, it's meaningless to me, because you don't have all of the other meanings of the language, which is cultural, social, political, economic, and not just words, right? And so the children are responding in part, I think, because there is this richness of the dialogue, the richness of expression, and they don't have to think and translate like I do in Stellenbosch, where I have to translate from English to Afrikaans when I speak to people who are hardkoppig, you know, etc. So I think it does play a role. But having said that, and I've been consistent on this through the years, when you look at why our children underperform just in the normal exams and tests and so on, it's not because of language. Even when our students wrote the recent PILS or TIMS tests in isiZulu or in Sesotho, they still failed big time. So while this is valuable for a whole lot of reasons, including social, emotional, and so on, and intellectual, it's not enough because you're failing in any language, right, in some of these subjects. So the extent to which we can do both. The problem we have is the problem Neville Alexander put so beautifully in his years, you know, and he says, you know, the problem we have is you will never see, this was his example, you'll never see the person in the German parliament speaking in English. You know, they speak German. In the South African parliament, people don't speak a language that relates to their constituency and so on, so on. They would speak in English. And I think there isn't a modeling of what you're talking about unless you meet this exceptional teacher. And it would be wonderful if that was true for many more.
Thank you very much. Because of our time, we'll probably send you a barrage of questions virtually.
Oh, by the way, on that last page is my son email at Stellenbosch. And if you want to know what I'm up to, I've got that personal website, and I update it weekly, so you'll also be able to see the kind of stuff that I'm doing around the world, around the country, et cetera, et cetera. And so feel free to communicate, yes. Now,
thank you.
Before any of you jump on me, I promised a student journalist and somebody from a newspaper with the word G in it, you know, I promised them some time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to give them some time.
That's all right.
Yeah,
I don't mind.
Are we having dinner?
Yes,
I know there's budget cuts. I don't know if the...
No, there will be dinner.
No, I'm joking.
There definitely will be. I just want at this point to really thank you so much for really honoring us and being here with us to speak on these deep issues. This is a part of a chapter of a journey in this book that will be continued. At this point, I want to recognize Pedro. Please come through. Just come to the front, Pedro. Pedro is acting on behalf of the organizers of this series. So I would like him to really close this meeting. And organizers, I want to really appreciate you colleagues and for all this work that has gotten us into this space. Also, just to thank you colleagues from other faculties this is just the beginning of something that's building up to very huge conversations in terms of the direction of matters of teaching and learning in the institution. So I want to leave this to Pedro to formally close this. Thank you.
Or formally open
Yeah.
seminar series. Thanks. You know how to do that? Yeah, good. It's thanks, Innocent. Happy birthday. This seminar series starts from, at least from my perspective, out of a deep frustration, because I think education is just, we cannot have a healthy democracy without a healthy education system. And education is incredibly complex and a rich thing, and I don't think we as teachers have taken that seriously enough. Just how deep and how important education is. And education isn't about, it's about creating conditions for human beings to be human in the richest possible sense. That is, I think, at the bottom what education is about. It's not about universities. I mean, I'm so frustrated universities tend to be certification mills where we create professionals that will serve the capitalist system. And I think we need to think way out of the box there. And we need to think about the ideological conditions that are making it so that our students are not sufficiently engaged with the knowledge project. We need to think about what it is that we can do that, to engage them, to bring them in. I know, for example, things that I've just recently discovered is the amount of class divide that exists in my classes. So middle class, almost all kids black, but middle class black kids who speak in the formal Model C accent intimidate the kids who don't speak and who speak in other African accents, other African English accents, and there are many. And the kids sit separately, they don't come together. So it's not just about my community and my ability to commune with my students, as Professor says, and I think that's incredibly important that I show that I care about my students, that I want them to learn, that I want them to grow, that I want them to be here, that I'm interested in them, but also how to get our students to think together, to come together and not sit in little islands here and there. That to me is a huge puzzle, and I don't think the answer and the solution or the way in which one should engage as a teacher is something that we can just say, oh, it's easy, here's the formula. We just have to continuously think, and that's why the seminar series has come into being, so that we can continually think together about how to make a university into the place that we really want it to be once we've thought about it carefully. So thank you very much, and I hope this is the beginning of a lot.
Are you one of the journalists? Can we go that side to that room over there?
And that's it.
So notify you further where we go and where we take this forward.
First term next year.
Yeah.
I'm just going across to that room with the students for a few minutes. Okay. Right. Yes. Oh, yes, thank you. You took some pictures? Okay. Cool.